Okay, so good morning, everyone. As always, we're going to just carry on with the suttas where we left off yesterday. And we're going to have a look. Next sutta is called A Monk, Bhikkhu. And just to give you a little bit of kind of background on what we're going to do next, because so far what we have done, we have looked at the progress of meditation, how meditation works mostly, through the starting with the breath meditation and looking at the nimittas and all of these kind of things. So basically how meditation functions, the progress we can expect to make when it works, and these sort of issues. And now we are basically almost exactly halfway through this retreat. It goes really fast. Before you know it, it's kind of over. So try to enjoy every moment, because these things are so quick and then they disappear, kind of gone. So this is a suitable point, I think, to move from the actual what happens in meditation to the things that support meditation practice. So now we're going to kind of almost like take a step back in a sense, and we're going to look at all the issues that support. And these are the reason why I talk about these things last rather than first, is because these are like ongoing things that you want to develop throughout your life at all times, whether it's on retreat or outside retreat or whenever really. So these are like a broader view of what the Dhamma and the practice of Buddhism is really what it concerns. So that's why now is kind of, I think, a good time to talk about this. And what you will see as we go through this, that there are two things in particular that supports meditation. In fact, it supports not just meditation, it supports everything in the spiritual life. And these two things are right view and sila, morality. These are the two things. And in this particular retreat, I want to focus on the idea of right view. That's why it's called supercharging your practice with right view. So this is what I'm going to focus on. And I think for very good reasons, because sila, most people understand, right view is a bit more involved, and so it needs a bit more explication to understand what it is about. So we're going to start with this first little sutta, just to kind of lay the foundation and kind of to support the claim I'm making that right view is important for meditation practice. So this is from the Samyutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses of the Buddha, SN, Samyutta Nikaya. 47 is the 47th chapter. This is the chapter on Satipatthana, on mindfulness meditation, or the focuses of mindfulness. Sutta number 3, as our good friend Ping Pong pointed out, not sutta number 4. So this is how it goes. It's a very short little sutta, and this is only a kind of extract anyway. So at one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then a mendicant went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, may the Buddha please teach me the Dhamma in brief. When I've heard it, I'll live alone, withdrawn, diligent, keen, and resolute." So this is a fairly common thing that we see in the suttas. We see a mendicant, we see a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni. The lay people don't do this. It's only the monastics, it seems, at least. That is what we have in the suttas now. And they are keen on withdrawing from the monastery, can maybe living in the forest on their own. They have reached a certain stage in their practice or whatever it might be, and now they're ready. They feel ready for the deeper kind of insights and understanding. And this is a typical kind of way that they express this. So teach me the Dhamma in brief. In other words, please just give me a teaching that is kind of special for me. And every time they ask for a teaching that is special for me, this is kind of, I think, where this idea comes, that the Buddha gives special teaching to people, tailored to their personality, tailored to their defilements and characteristics or what have you. It comes from these things when the Buddha gives teachings to individuals like this. But the interesting thing is that those teachings are not all that special. They are basically just more of the same. It's just like it's like the Buddha picks out maybe a particular theme or something, and maybe that is tailored for that person, but it's not something unique or something special. And of course, the reason for that is that we all have the same kind of minds. We all have the same kind of defilements. We all have the same kind of issues. And so the teachings are universal. They are the same for everyone, except that certain defilements need certain teaching. So if you are a person who is more inclined to anger, well, then you need to do certain things. If you're more inclined to desire, you need certain things. And if you are largely overcome that, well, then you need to focus on samadhi. But these are just different areas that actually apply to everyone. There's nothing unique to an individual person. And this is, I think, is an important point, this idea that somehow the Buddha taught very individually. I think that is really a misunderstanding, because there is no interesting individuality. Yeah, we're not interesting as individuals. We are pretty much the same. Yeah, it's kind of boring truth, but we are largely the same. And in one sense, it's good as well, because it means we can understand each other. And that's kind of useful. So he then says, I will live alone, eka, alone, by myself, withdrawn. I haven't looked the Pali, I think it's patisalana probably, or upakatta. Upakato, right, so upakato, diligent, we have mentioned these before. So, the words, you go out on your own, and then you are ready for the deeper aspects of the Dhamma. So this is what the Buddha replies. This is exactly how some silly people ask me for something, but when the teaching has been explained, they think only of following me around. So this is kind of an interesting thing that the Buddha says here. You ask for these kind of teachings, but are you ready for it? Are you able to take it on board? Do you have enough wisdom to really grasp these things? And so I think what the Buddha says here is not kind of telling this monk off. I don't think that's the point. He's more kind of making him reflect a little bit at the moment to be able to take on board the teaching that is coming. Sometimes you have to kind of help people to get into the right mindset. If they are in the wrong mindset, they're not even open to the teaching. So listen. Are you sure that you are ready for this? Are you being, where is your mind at right now? And it's kind of providing that mirror, or whatever you want to call it, for that person to reflect on themselves. And the idea of following the Buddha around, right? This is kind of a common thing also in the present day. You have a teacher, you follow your teacher around everywhere, and you become you're holding on to that teacher. But there comes a point when you know enough. You don't need to follow the teacher around anymore. Now is the time to withdraw. Now is the time to actually do the practice properly. What is that time? And usually that time is when your meditation is really taking off. You are, getting jhanas, at least occasionally. That would be the time when you do this. Because then you are self-sufficient. You have the strength, you have the non-delusion, you have the clarity to enable you to live on your own. You don't need that support of a teacher anymore. Often what happens is that people overestimate their own abilities and they go off on their own when they are not ready to go off on their own. And what happens then is one of two things. Either you go nuts, and this happens, people go nuts. This is not that uncommon, especially if you live long periods in solitude. It's really difficult, There's no one to kind of bounce off your weirdness or the stuff going on with you, and you kind of, after a while, you go into this delusion bubble, and you kind of go spiral out, and you come out, you got these wide eyes, you come out back into the world, and wow. And there's many examples of that. So that's one thing that happened. Or your mind just completely gets overwhelmed by defilements, and you end up disrobing. And this is also not that uncommon, actually. So it takes a lot to be able to live on your own. People generally overestimate themselves. Why do they overestimate themselves? Because of the ego. The sense of self wants you to be good and to be superior and to be someone special. And so, I'm going to do this by myself. Why? Because I am me, and me is good. And it's the I, the sense of self, which almost always gets in the way and is problematic. And then this monk getting this kind of gentle rebuke, or whatever you want to call it, from the Buddha, he then says, "Sir, may the Buddha please teach me the Dhamma in brief. May the Holy One here is a translation for Sugata, which means something like the one who has gone to the good destination, or something like that. May the Holy One teach me the Dhamma in brief. Hopefully I can understand the meaning of what the Buddha says. Hopefully I can be an heir of the Buddha's teaching." Yeah. So the Buddha has kind of set him up so that he is ready to listen properly. And then the Buddha says the following: "Well then, mendicant, you should purify the starting point of skillful qualities." Kusala Dhamma, I think, is the word here. What is the starting point of skillful qualities? Well-purified ethics and correct view. When your ethics are well purified and your view is correct, you should develop the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation in 3 ways, depending on and grounded on ethics. So mindfulness meditations are the Satipatthanas here. And so this is really interesting. Yeah, there's 2 things that you need to get sorted out for that mindfulness meditation to bear proper fruit. And that is ethics, or sila, or morality, or conduct, or personal qualities, whatever you want to call it. This is number 1. And the other one is correct view, which here is ujjuka ditti. Ujju means straight. So straight view means view in accordance with how the Buddha saw the world, in accordance with the world actually is. Yeah, these are the 2 things. And this is interesting because very often when we talk about ethics, we have talked about a lot in Buddhism, and ethics are incredibly important. And if any of you don't keep the 5 precepts regularly, I would really, really encourage you to keep those at all times. And in fact, even that is often not enough. You have to go beyond the 5 precepts to develop metta and compassion and these kind of things in your life. But at least, please keep the 5 precepts, because this is the foundation for all Buddhist practice. But what is interesting here, that is kind of understandable that is the foundation for meditation, because if you keep ethics, you will tend to feel good about yourself. When you feel good about yourself, it's easier to stay in the present. The mind doesn't go all over the place because you are happy to be here. So that's kind of natural. Yeah, you already have a kind of a good feeling here. You don't have any regret, as it says in this sutta we saw the other day here. But what is not so obvious is that right view is a powerful factor for meditation practice. We know that right view is at the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path, and that is slightly different, because then it is a foundation for everything. But here it is specifically the foundation for meditation practice. And so the point here is that right view is the support for everything in Buddhism. Yeah, if you want to have right intention, if you want to have the right kind of purpose, the right aim, the right goal in life, first of all you have to have right view, because that right view will tell you the direction you should take. If you have wrong view, you're going to take a stupid direction. That's all by definition. If you have right view, if you see the world as it actually is, well, then you will direct your mind in accordance with that reality. If you direct your mind in accordance with non-reality, you're going to suffer, because it's not aligned with how things actually are. It's kind of very simple. It's the same thing even in daily life. If you have a wrong view about whatever, you tend to hurt yourself. But if you think you're going to have breakfast because you think breakfast will be served, but unfortunately Deepika didn't provide breakfast because she's going to test us, see how our equanimity is on that morning. You have wrong view that there's going to be breakfast, and you might be disappointed. You say, "Oh, no breakfast, gee, what happened?" And then maybe you have compassion because, "Oh, maybe Deepika is not feeling so good today." So then you go and check on her and see if she's okay and provide some medicine if required or whatever. But initially you might get disappointed. Why? Because you have wrong view, And this is kind of everything in life is like that. Wrong view always leads to dukkha. Wrong view leads to making bad decisions. You think that this is going to make you successful, and maybe it doesn't, or whatever. And so right view is a foundation for everything. then you make good decisions based on the way the world actually is. And when you make those good decisions, the first of those good decisions is to be ethical. That is right speech, right action, right livelihood. You get into ethics because you understand, actually, if you want to be happy, that is the way to achieve some degree of happiness. If you're unethical, you're never going to be really happy. You're always going to be miserable. You are ultimately going to blame yourself, because that is what the sense of self does. Even if it is an illusion, it still blames you. That illusion blames you for doing things wrong. Even if you don't believe in ethics, you will still blame yourself. And then you take it further into right effort, where you purify the mind, you move on to metta and karuna and all of these kind of things. And then it becomes a support for meditation. So right view, support all the way through. And how exactly does it support meditation? Well, in a number of ways. One of the ways, it helps you to feel joy. Because right view means that you have a sense of that there is Dhamma in the world. There is these teachings. There is this thing that leads you to real contentment, real happiness, to anything that is meaningful. And that's kind of extraordinary. Wow, is that true, that these teachings exist? Was there a person like the Buddha who understood the nature of reality and can take us from ignorance to wisdom? That's amazing if that's the case. And you start to feel so happy that you have a teacher like the Buddha to guide you in your life, that these teachings are still available, and that there still is, even in the present day, people who achieve the same results. What an extraordinary thing that is. This is part of right view, the understanding that there are awakened people in the world. In fact, this is one of the ways right view is defined in certain places in the suttas. So it gives rise to joy. That's one way that right view works, and we'll see that in a second, come back to this. Another way that it works is that it changes your priorities. It makes you value what is truly valuable in life. And very often we value things that actually have no value. We value kind of stupid things like status and kind of belongings and all these kind of things. And some people are worse, some people are less bad, and some people don't care about those things at all. But there's a tendency towards that for most people. But with the Dhamma, your values change. What is important to you changes. Suddenly what is important is to be kind, to be generous, to do these things. And after a while, you don't care so much about this other stuff anymore. You realize it is ephemeral. It passes so quickly. You can't hold on to these things anyway. They don't really matter. And so your values change, your priorities change, your life changes course, and everything revolves around how to live the spiritual practice. Even the worldly things that you have to do to survive, the job you have, the family life, and whatever it is, all of these things then become kind of revolve around Dhamma, revolve around the spiritual path. And so right view is essential. And because you have right view, then when you sit down on your cushion and you sit down to meditate, you're not interested in the worldly stuff. And if you're not interested in the worldly stuff, your mind is not going to go to those things. It is not going to think about the future, because that future is actually irrelevant. When I mean that future, I mean the future in the world is irrelevant. The past, in that world is not important anymore. And whatever is there and bothering you, well, you know how to forgive. Forgiveness too comes from right view. The ability to forgive properly comes from understanding what people actually are and then forgiving them on that basis. And so all of these things, the ability to be present, comes from right view, essentially. And wrong view leads to proliferation, leads to being interested in the future and the past and all of these kind of things. This is not absolute. Even if you have complete right view, let's say you are a stream enterer and you are very busy, then the mind will be affected by that. So it's not kind of absolute. If you have right view, then you become peaceful straight away. But it is your mind is inclining towards that at all times, and it makes it much easier here. So this is right view in meditation. And so now we want to discuss this in greater detail so as to understand what this actually is, so that it may become a power in our meditation practice. And once you have purified this starting point in wholesome qualities, skillful qualities, then the meditation works in this way. You develop the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation in 3 ways, and those 3 ways are eternally, externally, internally, and externally. And internally, or in the suttas, often means that which leads to samadhi. Yeah, so you develop it towards samadhi. This is what you find in certain suttas. Right mindfulness leads to samadhi, and externally often has more to do with insight, actually, and then internally and externally is like the more universal kind of insight. So that is the background for you. So now we are going to move on to the Mahanama Sutta with Mahanama. And this is a sutta that talks about the 6 kinds of recollections, and the purpose of these recollections is to generate joy. Yeah, so this is such an important part of meditation practice, and it is something that people often have difficulties with, to generate joy. Many people can become reasonably peaceful. Some people can't even become peaceful. Wherever you're at, it's okay. It's just where you're at. It's just your background. This is not you should never judge yourself because you are the product of your conditioning. But people are at all different levels in their spiritual practice. And so how can we generate joy? This is kind of what this really is about. And then we can use these ideas to boost our meditation. This is kind of the idea here. So it is based on right view leading to joy, and that joy then leading to powerful meditation. That's kind of what is behind this. Okay. So at one time the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sakyans near Kapilavatthu in the Banyan Tree Monastery. Then Mahanama the Sakyan went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, when a noble disciple has reached the fruit and understood the instructions, what kind of meditation do they frequently practice?" So here we have the Buddha visiting his relatives, his kind of clan, the Sakyans. Kapilavatthu being the main town of the Sakyans, and there's a Nigrodharama is the Banyan Tree Monastery. And then Mahanama is one of the famous Sakyans. He was the brother of Anuruddha, and he comes and he bows down and he speaks to the Buddha. They had quite frequent conversations. And Mahanama was a very powerful layperson. He's said to have been a stream enterer, and that's why he starts off by saying, a noble disciple who has reached the fruit. If you have reached the fruit, that means you have reached the fruit of stream entries. You're a stream enterer. Understood the instruction is a similar kind of idea. Understood means fully understood. So it is someone who has this experiential understanding of the Dhamma. So what should they practice? And you may think, well, in that case, this does not relate to me, so now I can leave the room. But please don't think like that, because this is really applicable for everyone. And in other suttas, the Buddha gives the same instruction to non-Aryans, to ordinary people. It's just that for the Aryans, this is automatic. For the Aryans, this happens automatically because they know what the Buddha is. They know what the Dhamma is. And so for them, giving rise to joy on the basis of these things is almost like a matter of course. But for those who are not Aryans, it is more difficult. And it takes a bit more contemplation, a bit more reflection to be able to make these things happen. So they come then in a sequence, and the most powerful one of these reflections is the reflection on the Buddha, and then they kind of go gradually down, and the last one is the reflection or contemplation of the Devatas, the Devas. But there's a nice little story. I'll tell you this little story because it's nice to have some stories in part of all this Dhamma. And this is one of it's the reason I like this story is partly because I translated it, because it's found in the Vinaya Pitaka. And did it really happen in this way? Probably not exactly this way, but it's a nice story anyway. So it's kind of there's probably a kernel of truth to it, because a lot of these legends, they have a kernel of truth, and then they have been elaborated slightly on her. And this is the story of Mahanama and Anuruddha, who were brothers, and they were cousins of the future Buddha, and all of these things. They're all part of the same clan. And at that time, and it may have been around this time when the Buddha was in the Sakyan country, or shortly afterwards, around this time. And when he was back home, then all of these Sakyans think, wow, look at our clansman, he's become a Buddha. We should all go forth. And so according to this story, every family in the Sakyan Republic had one son. I don't think there was any Bhikkhuni Sangha yet, so it was at that time it was had one son who should become a monk. Every family had one son. Okay, you become a monk. And in these days it's like the dum-dum of the family becomes the monk. In those days it was the best one, the sharpest one became the monk. In those days they were smart. In these days, not so smart. So and so in the family of Anuruddha and Mahanama, no one had yet gone forth. So Mahanama, who seems to be, at this point, the wiser one of the two, at this point Mahanama is the wise one, he goes to his brother Anuruddha and says, well, listen, Anuruddha, one of us should go forth. All the other families have one who's gone forth. And Anuruddha says that I have had such an incredibly comfortable upbringing that there's no way that I can go forth. It's too difficult to be a monk, too much dukkha, so you go forth. And the story behind this is the famous story of the nutty cakes. The nut is a story that Ajahn Brahm tells. That's even more obscure from some kind of commentary somewhere. It's a much more even more unreliable than what I'm telling you now. But it kind of fits in with the theme quite nicely. The story of the nutty cakes is where Anuruddha, whenever he went to his mother, when he was a child, whenever he went to his mother, and whenever he asked for a cake or a biscuit or whatever, she would always give him a cake. So I don't know if that's kind of a good mother who always gives a cake. Probably not the ideal mother. What do you say, Rumi? Should mothers always give you're a doctor, should they always give cake to their children? Depends on how mindful you are. Okay, that does not sound like the right reason always. Okay, right. So anyway, he was always got what he wanted, right? And then one day the mother ran out of cakes. And so this little Anuruddha, the boy Anuruddha, I don't know, maybe he's grown up a little bit by now, he goes to his mom and says, oh, I want some cakes. And the mother says, nutty cakes. Nutty means there aren't any cakes. But he had never heard the word nutty before, there isn't. And so when he heard nutty cakes, he thought it was a kind of cakes. So he says, yes, please, the nutty cakes. Please, let's have some nutty cakes. And this is kind of how spoiled he was, right? So he was spoiled. You would have thought he was spoiled rotten. Surely he would make a really bad monk, you would think, right? Spoiled rotten like that. But of course, life is very uncertain, and it turns out that Anuruddha actually becomes a really good monk. We are complicated as human beings. We have so many sides to us. Sometimes you can be spoiled as a child and still turn out good. Otherwise, you're spoiled and you actually turn out really bad. Sometimes you have a hard life as a child and that destroys you. Sometimes you have a hard life as a child and actually that makes you stronger. It depends on individual circumstances so much. And so very difficult to put people in boxes and say, you are like this. We have so many sides to us. And so, of course, he then ends up, when he eventually goes forth, he becomes the Buddha's number one disciple in the Dibbachakku, which can be translated as clairvoyance or the divine eye or whatever you like. But here, in this story, he is saying, no, okay, too difficult for me because I've been brought up in too much comfort. And then Mahanama says to him, well, he says, okay, so I'll go forth and you stay in the home life, but then I will have to pass on all the duties of the home life to you. And Anuruddha says, wait a minute. Okay, what are those duties, right? And he said, well, those duties are that when the spring comes, you have to till the fields. And after tilling the fields, you have to, well, how does this go? Tilling the fields, and you have to kind of make the furrows. And you have to pick out all the rocks that are in the fields, right? To make the furrows. And then you have to put in the seeds. After putting in the seeds, you have to irrigate the fields. After irrigating the fields, you have to drain the field. After draining the field, you have to pick out all the weeds. After picking out the weeds and the kind of the crop comes up, you have to reap it. After reaping it, you have to thresh it. Is that what you do? Thresh it. After threshing it, you have to winnow it to get all the kind of the rubbish out. And after winnowing it, you take the seeds and you use some and you store the rest in the kind of in the silos or whatever they had in those days. And after storing it in the silos, the next season begins. And Anuruddha said, but when does the work stop? And then Mahanama says, it never stops. It never stops. He says, while our fathers and forefathers were working in the fields, in the middle of working, they would just die. And then the next generation would carry on. And then Anuruddha said, well, in that case, I will go forth and you stay in the home life. It's a miracle he became a good monk, right? That's kind of That's a nice story. So, this is Mahanama. He was the responsible one, and he turns out also to be a very good lay upasaka, lay person. And he does his work really well. He becomes a stream enterer, and then he goes and have regular chats with the Buddha about, how to practice. So he's a very impressive person. Actually, both brothers turned out to be super duper people. So he asks this question, how should the noble disciple meditate, basically? Or how should they reflect? How should they dwell, is the Pali word. Viharati is the Pali word. And Bhante Sujato translates dwell as meditation, to meditate. And it is interesting. I think in most situations it is a very precise translation, and it works really well. But viharati is a bit broader than meditate. It depends on the circumstances what it means. Here, I think it works really well. But in other situations, viharati means like how you live your life, basically. Your kind of general attitude to life, whether you dwell in virtue or not, these kind of things. So its meaning is a little bit broader than just meditation. And here too, it can also have the understanding of contemplate on top of just ordinary meditation practice. So how do you contemplate and meditate? How do you dwell? How do you live, basically? That's kind of what it means almost. How do you live? That is a bit more encompassing than just how do you meditate. And so then the Buddha says the following. Firstly, a noble disciple recollects the Buddha, the realized one. That blessed one is perfected, a fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, holy, knower of the world, supreme guide for those who wish to train, teacher of gods and humans, awakened, blessed. So this there is that very well-known paragraph that we chant so often as Buddhists, Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vijja Charana Sampanno, etc. That is what that is, And so this is something you see in many, many places in the suttas. And what this is, it is the way the Buddha says we should recollect the Buddha. This is how we should remember the Buddha. That's basically what he's saying. And some of the interesting things here that you will notice that is very different from how most people recollect the Buddha, even though they chant this all the time and they're supposed to know what it means. That doesn't mean that they actually remember the Buddha according to this. Oh no, they remember the Buddha in all kind of different ways. And of course, the favorite way that most people like to recall the Buddha is through all the psychic powers and all the marvelous things that he did. Just like these days, they want to know the psychic powers of this monk or this person. Wow, can fly through the air or whatever. But here, there's nothing about psychic powers. There's nothing about these kind of extraordinary things. Everything here is about wisdom, is about being a teacher, is about your understanding of the nature of reality. That is what matters when it comes to the Buddha. And this is already a very important pointer to how we often go wrong in contemporary Buddhist culture. We focus on the wrong things. We focus on things that are really just entertainment, if you're going to be honest about it. That's what it's kind of marvelous entertainment. And I understand why people are interested, because it is marvelous. It doesn't really get you anywhere. And very soon it fades away, and you want to see more of it, right? It's kind of, oh yeah, now it's become common. They're flying through the air again. Then you have to do something more to keep you entertaining. This is how these things often are. And so the focus in Buddhism is not on those things. In fact, the Buddha makes it very clear elsewhere that he doesn't like these supernormal powers. This is in the Kavada Sutta, the Digha Nikaya 11, where he specifically says that he abhors and detests and is disgusted by these psychic powers. Specifically, and that's very, very strong language that he uses to say he doesn't really approve of it. And for that reason, sometimes we focus on the wrong things. And this is right here. You can see how the Buddha says we should reflect on who he is. And it's got nothing to do with these things. So this is just the first initial point about this. But before I, maybe not, I don't know. So let's kind of analyze this in a little bit detail about what this actually means. And there's a number of things that I kind of like to point out when I look at this. And one of the things that I've already kind of been talking a bit about already is this idea of understanding the Buddha as a human being. I already mentioned this already in a few places in the suttas where the Buddha really comes out as a human being. And here again, this non-focus on these psychic powers is part of that. If you think of the Buddha too much in terms of psychic powers, you're creating a distance between you and the Buddha. That's kind of because you feel you can't really grasp him anymore. It's kind of a bit weird. Is it really true? Is it just legends? And all of these things start to play in your mind if you think too much about these things. So the first thing is to kind of think of the Buddha, to make the Buddha your teacher. Like anyone can be your teacher. Like you can go to Ajahn Brahm or Bhante Sujato or Venerable, some of the nuns or whoever it might be, and you can go to them as a teacher and say, well, I have this problem, what should I do? Or whatever it might be. Now, to be able for the Buddha to be your teacher, you have to feel some sort of affinity with the Buddha. It can't be too foreign. If it's too foreign, you feel just completely, either you feel like you are too inferior to really be able to understand what the teacher says, or you feel that the Buddha is kind of talking from the point of view of some completely different person, so you can't understand what they're talking about anyway. But if the Buddha is a human being, and we see this in the suttas again and again, then the Buddha will have had the same experiences as us before his awakening. Because that's the point. It's only after his awakening that he becomes an arahant and he's different. Before his awakening, he's essentially like us. And the more, to me, this is the beauty of Buddhism, that the center point of Buddhism is another human being who has insight into this existence. Because it has so many, first of all, we can then relate to the Buddha. Second, it means that we have essentially the same nature, so we can also go there. Everything comes together, in a beautiful way. And so you want to understand the Buddha as a human being, rather than as something that is who is slightly different, or very different, or a middle way different, or whatever. And one of the starting points with that is to see the Buddha before his awakening. And what you see with the Buddha when he talks about his life before his awakening, you see exactly the same issues as every one of us has in our lives. The Buddha talks about the defilements he had before his awakening, when he was the Buddha to be. He talks about this in the Dveda Vitakka Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 19, the two kinds of thoughts. And he says specifically that, before my awakening, when I had thoughts of, and he uses thoughts of ill will, thoughts of sensuality, and thoughts of harming. These are the three kinds of wrong intention or wrong kind of thoughts. Yeah, when these arose, I knew that they arose, and I dealt with them in this particular way. It's a very interesting sutta on how to deal, by the way, with thinking, yeah, and overcoming wrong kinds of thought. So that's exactly the problem we have, yeah? These thoughts coming up, invading the mind, making us restless and tired and all of these kind of things. The Buddha-to-be had the same kind of issues, lo and behold. Then you have the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, where the Buddha talks about, again, his life before his awakening. And he says there that, he obviously has he has a child. Yeah, we know that from the story's life. He enjoyed lots of sensual pleasures. We know that from the way he is talked about in certain suttas. And then he says in this Arya Pariyesana Sutta, yeah, the difference between the noble search and the ignoble search is the ignoble search is the search where you search for those things that have the same nature that you have, the nature to die, the nature to get old, the nature to get defiled. And he too was searching for those things prior to his leaving the household life. Yeah, because he too was bound to these things. And he says this is just dukkha to do that. And so I will try to find a solution. Again, very, very close to what, people in the world, everyone really has this kind of issue, being bound to the things of the world that actually have the same nature as you have. Again, this is the Buddha-to-be. Then you have the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta, the sutta to Prince Bodhi, where the Buddha says he had wrong view before his awakening. Yeah, he didn't understand how to reach awakening. I mentioned this before, where you have the idea that suffering leads to happiness rather than happiness leading to happiness. And so you have all of these all of these places. Yeah, then you have the Buddha torturing himself, because torture leads to, that's also kind of part of that wrong view, which still in the present day lots of people buy into these ideas. And so we see the Buddha as an ordinary human being. Then there is the fact that the word bodhisattva, which has been, I think, rightly translated by Bhante Sujato as someone who is intent on awakening rather than a bodhisattva. In other words, this later idea that came after the suttas of someone who practices for 4 incalculable eons to become a Buddha, to purify the paramis and these kind of things, that's a later idea. And what happens is that later idea, when you read the suttas, you understand that later idea into the suttas. And so it's like we bring later ideas into the suttas because they are in our mind already. And so when we see the word bodhisattva, oh yeah, it means that. It means the fellow who practiced for 4 incalculable eons. Actually, it doesn't mean that at all, because that idea only comes later. And this is how we are influenced by later things when we read the early suttas. And that is really problematic. And so in the suttas, the bodhisattva is the one who is intent on awakening the moment he goes forth. That is when he becomes intent on awakening. And he is intent on awakening from that point until the point he reaches the awakening. That is the bodhisattva. It doesn't have this long history here. And again, it makes the Buddha into a more normal human being. Yeah, it doesn't kind of blow this person out of all proportions into something that is unachievable for anyone else. You have to be super duper special. Actually, it's achievable for nobody, because even the Buddha didn't do this. So this is kind of the point. Yeah, it's just mythology, it's just legend. It has no basis in reality. And so now we're starting to kind of get more clarity about this person, who this person was. We start to see. And then there is all the things in the suttas when we see the Buddha interacting with the monks and interacting with the lay people, and where we see how they treat the Buddha largely as an ordinary human being. The Buddha goes on alms round. Yeah, he goes on alms round. How would you feel if the Buddha came on alms round to your house? Would you say, oh yeah, it's just the Buddha, give him some food? Or would you say, wow, the Buddha is coming? Yeah, for those people, it was just natural. The Buddha was a mendicant, he was one of the kind of monks, and they would give him alms food. Yes, it was kind of obviously inspiring in many ways, especially if you were a Buddhist and you understood what was going on, but he was still also an ordinary monk. And the weird thing is that sometimes the more awakened you are, the more ordinary you are, in a sense. That's kind of the strange thing, because the ego is what kind of makes us want to be special and wants us to make us stand out. But when the ego is gone, you kind of fade away a little bit. You don't have any desire to stand out anymore. And to me, Ajahn Brahm is a really good example of that. Sometimes he just sits there like this grey potato sack or whatever. He sits there against the wall, leaning back, his robe kind of falling off, drinking his cup of tea. He never takes himself seriously at all. And there's something really, really beautiful about that, really beautiful. Ajahn Brahm has a very strong sense of non-self about him. And this is one of the things you notice when you live with someone for a long time. I've lived with him for over 30 years. So I know him kind of really, really well. And he has this beautiful feeling of non-self that is very, very rare to find anyone quite like that. Ajahn Brahm kind of stands out in a sense. That's one of the things that I certainly notice about him, and I'm sure the Venerables here too, who know him well, will maybe agree with that. I know they can speak for themselves, of course. I shouldn't speak on other people's behalf. So in a sense they are kind of, and that makes you unafraid, because they are very unscary people. It's kind of weird that sometimes we are afraid of the Buddha, I mean, if you met the Buddha, would you be afraid? Probably, you'd be a bit apprehensive. Right? And even when you hear about some kind of great kind of spiritual master, you may be a bit scared. Maybe they will read my mind, or maybe who knows what they will do. But actually, they are the least scary people in the world. Because these are people who actually do have that compassion, do have that friendliness. And so you're never scared of these people. Ajahn Brahm sometimes asks me, you have to give a talk and I will be in the audience. Are you comfortable with that? And I say, you are the least frightening person, Ajahn. You are I know that regardless of what I say, even if I talk just rubbish, you will praise me anyway. So why should I be afraid of you? And that's kind of nice. You know that he will never judge you, regardless of what happens. And so the Buddha is this person. You see him interact in the suttas. He goes on arms around her. And then he leaves because he's fed up with the monks arguing. So he goes. He sets his kuti in order. That's what it says in the suttas. He doesn't have an upatak even who organizes things for him. He puts his own things in order. So again, it's an ordinary person. He washes his own feet. And the monks don't listen to him. They just walk away. All of these things suggest an ordinary person among other people. That's what it suggests all the way through. And so this is one thing to remember about the Buddha. But then that side of the Buddha needs to be balanced with the side which truly is exceptional. And the side which truly is exceptional is his understanding of the human condition. His insight into the deep aspect of what the human mind actually is. The fact that it is impermanent. The fact that there is no essence to a human being. The understanding of human psychology to the point where it can kind of guide you out of this. And of course, the most amazing thing of the Buddhist teaching is the fact that he was able to phrase all of these profound insights into a language that everyone can understand, and they can follow the same path and then have the same results. So that is what is interesting about the Buddha, the fact that he has this wisdom and this ability to pass these things on. So when we talk about the Buddha as a teacher, we talk about him as this supreme teacher of gods and humans. This is why he is the supreme teacher, because he has understood suffering and happiness all the way to the bottom, all the way to the core, and he knows how to achieve the highest happiness. In other words, he knows how to achieve what everyone in the world really wants. What is craving? What is the desire that we have in us? Everything about desire is this search for something positive, something meaningful, something happy, something that gives rise to contentment. That's why there is craving. That's why each one of us comes on a retreat like this, because we are on that search. And the Buddha has discovered the answer to that. He knows where to find it. Whereas the whole world is blind, moving around trying to find this, running about in craving, haven't got the answer. The Buddha has found it. And that is what makes the Buddha so extraordinary. This answer is very, very difficult to find. That is why Buddhas are so rare in the world. This is what the wisdom of the Buddha is about. The ability, having discovered the answer to the question of the meaning of life. A question that humanity has been looking for millennia. You look at all the various cultures in humanity, they're all on this search for meaning, for purpose. Philosophers have been contemplating and discussing these questions. Religions have been trying to find it in various kind of ways. Spiritual paths, psychologies. No one really finds it. Everyone says this is a conundrum that is insoluble. Life, maybe it has no meaning, or maybe it is some kind of omega point that we're all moving towards in the future. And the Buddha says, you're all looking in the wrong place. You need to look inward, and you will find it inside of yourself. The Buddha has solved the one thing that the rest of humanity has never really been able to find. That is what makes the Buddha extraordinary. And so get the scales right, understand it rightly, and then you can start to take the Buddha as your teacher. So the Buddha has this beautiful, profound wisdom. But what is so powerful about it, because he has that wisdom, he knows that he understands what everyone wants, he also has compassion, because he sees the suffering of humanity, knowing that he has the answer. Well, if you have the answer and you see the suffering, then compassion will arise. It doesn't arise before his awakening. He practices out of compassion for humanity, which is the story of the Bodhisattva, because he doesn't even know if there is an answer yet. How can he have compassion if he doesn't know the answer? It doesn't make any sense. In fact, the suttas never say that the Buddha to be practiced out of compassion. There's nothing about that in the suttas, and it doesn't make any sense either when you think about it. But when he finally does discover comes to awakening, and he understands the human condition, and he understands how all of this hangs together, then compassion arises, because then he has an answer. Then he wants to help people. And that's exactly what you see in places like the Arya Pariyesana Sutta. So this is the right way of thinking about it. Then the compassion arises. And then, because of that compassion for humanity, he starts to teach. Now, this is another kind of interesting point, is that most teachers in the world, they have some kind of vested interest in teaching. They teach because they get something out of it. I teach and I get a salary because I teach at school. Or I teach because then I become famous, and that will kind of, my ego will be flattered if I become famous. Or I will get lots of requisites, and I need these requisites like a Rolls Royce and that sort of stuff. And most people have a vested interest in teaching. If you have a sense of self, you're almost going to have a vested interest of some sort. But the Buddha has no vested interest. In fact, the Buddha has a negative vested interest. For the Buddha, he does not really want to teach because it is going to be a nuisance. People are going to argue with him. People are going to ask questions when he's not interested in answering those questions, when he would rather be on retreat. For him, it's going to be slightly painful to be a teacher. If the Buddha really was to choose the highest happiness for himself, it would be to go into a cave and just meditate all the time. And so the Buddha has a negative vested interest in teaching. And what that means is that he's teaching purely out of compassion, just out of kindness. And that means that the way he teaches will have a very profound purity to them. Anyone who has a vested interest, the way you teach will be touched by that vested interest. You will do things maybe to make people like you. You will do things to kind of whatever. Maybe you will add in too many jokes, or whatever it is into your talk. I don't know what will happen. But you have a vested interest. The Buddha does not. And so what that means is that the way he teaches is purely for the benefit of the listeners. Every word is well thought out. Every word is neither excessive nor deficient. Every word is just right to be able to describe the spiritual path in the best possible way. There's nothing there which is extraneous, nothing which is lacking. And so what that means, when you read the suttas, remember that. This is spoken out of compassion for humanity. There is absolutely no other reason why these suttas are spoken. And at the same time, they are spoken with the deepest kind of wisdom. And it's a beautiful combination, the idea of the deepest kind of wisdom combined with the highest kind of compassion. And there is no other reason why these things are spoken. So when you read the suttas with that in mind, you appreciate what is going on far, far more. It's like the compassion and the wisdom starts to stand out to you when you read these things. You remember that this is why these things are spoken. You don't read too fast. You start to read carefully because you know this is a very urgent and important message that is given in your best interest and for no other reason. And so you start to savor every sentence, every word. You think, what may the Buddha have meant by this? How can I apply this in my own life? How should I use this? How should I think about the world? What is this right view of business? You start to take it very seriously here because you know that this is what really matters in your life. This is the kind of teacher the Buddha is. And you also know at the same time that he understands you deeply because he is a human being just like you. He has been through the same things. He knows what is going on with you. He now has the deepest wisdom. He's now coming from compassion. And this whole thing comes together. And you start to take the Buddha as your teacher in a completely different way because you start thinking like this. So that is the beginning of this whole reflection or recollection of the Buddha, and we will carry on with this afternoon at 3 o'clock. So we'll see you back then.